Hi. Today I wanted to talk about blockchain governance. I find the topic both interesting and puzzling. It is interesting because, as often with the blockchain, the rules of governance are being rewritten seemingly from scratch. And it is puzzling because for all the effort and the thought that has been given to how blockchain can self-govern or find ways of governing itself, those innovations appear largely to have been unsuccessful or successful to a very limited degree. And one of the reasons behind this phenomenon appears to be good old human nature. In all the discussion about blockchain over the last decade or so, we'd be forgiven for having forgotten the fact that there are humans behind the code. We call them nodes, we call them creators, we call them coders, but they are human, they have human emotion, they have human bias, and they are the creators of blockchain technology. And they also maintain the blockchain. There are more humans on the blockchain, and they are the actors, the users, and they may be anonymized, but they are human. And finally, if you put a bunch of humans together, and the optimization of finances, money, as the primary incentive of the blockchain ticking along, then you can see human attitudes coming to the fore, including those attitudes that foster potential disputes. Hence the need for governance. I have been reading an excellent paper on this topic. It is called Blockchain Governance in the Wild. It is in a publication called Crypto-Economic Systems, Volume 3, Issue 1, published on 22nd April 2024. The authors are Kevin Werbach, Primavera de Filippi, Joshua Tan, and Gina Peters. And what they have done, probably for the first time, is to have collected data and empirical data regarding the governance practices at 23 blockchain projects. And they've collected this data via a questionnaire. I'm quoting from their introduction that explains how their work differs from existing literature in three significant ways. First of all, there's been very little comparative work so far among different blockchain networks or communities. And secondly, this is not so much a theoretical study of potential successes or failures, but instead they have tried to survey practical implementations and the plans of specific projects. And finally, what I find perhaps the most groundbreaking aspect of this research is that they have not stopped at examining only the governance decision encoded on chain, but also considered what they called social norms and formal practices and institutional governing entities associated with the projects. In other words, they have looked at the way that those who are essentially manning the blockchain converse with each other off-chain and make sure that they have a consensus in the way in which decisions are taken. So there is something that's almost intangible in terms of what goes on behind the scene. The authors point out, I think quite rightly, that the explicit rules of blockchain governance structures can be read from their software code or documentation, but neither the code nor the documentation can tell us how those rules interact with more informal off-chain practices. The authors identify three power clusters, as they call it, in their off-chain governance study. And they are, first, the key stakeholders, the developers, the validators, and the users. Secondly, the charismatic leaders, and they give as an example, the Bitcoin creator Satoshi Nakamoto or Vitalik Buterin at Ethereum. And thirdly, legal entities, which often are non-profit that are separate, and they act as foundations and manage the blockchain and are in charge of stewarding the development of the project. They look at the influence, the relative influence of all of these off-chain governance clusters, and it makes for interesting sociological and ethnographic study, topics that were not initially associated with the creation of the decentralized ledger technology. Another thing that is extremely interesting and provokes thought about this research is that one finds, when one looks at the social interaction around the blockchain, that really perhaps the mantra of decentralization at the end of the day, when one speaks of governance, is a myth. And it is a myth that in governance terms can probably not be sustainable. Food for thought. Happy reading.